Well, good morning, shipmates. Meine Damen und Herren, good morning, and thank you for joining me after that all-night party last night. And I trust you've had a good time in the past ports of Port Elizabeth and East London. And particularly if you've come to South Africa for the first time, it is a most remarkable country and beautiful and tragic and dramatic. And of course, we come here primarily to see the wildlife, which as we now experience, the ports of South Africa and these large cities along the shore with big industrial complexes are matched by an interior that is vast and then wildlife, which literally comes into the towns at times. I'm going to be talking about these next ports, Durban and Richards Bay. But this contrast between the wildlife and the industrial urbanization is one of the, let's say, interesting facts of South Africa. For instance, you know that in casinos in South Africa, they don't allow lions because they might turn out to be cheetahs. All right, there's the first one. I hope you're taking notes, because I'm going to talk about our upcoming ports. And Durban is the first one, of course, and we've been coming from Cape Town up to Namibia and then to Port Elizabeth and East London, and now we're coming up to the Natal coast and Natal River and Bay where Durban is. But you can see this high mountainous area. That is actually the independent kingdom of Lesotho, which is the highlands that were never conquered by invaders from outside of the Zulu nation. And we're going into the Zulu territory, which is the largest peoples of South Africa and the largest spoken language. Now, on a political map, you can just see, of course, Cape Town and up to the ports, and we are coming up to Durban there. And then it goes up as you can already feel the tropical humidity, because this part of South Africa is facing the Indian Ocean. It gets monsoon and cyclones and is very lush. And at Richards Bay, up there, it begins a sort of great marshlands that continue up into Mozambique, and then a wilder territory as you go in north and into deeper Africa. But this is Durban. It's a third largest city, over about 3 million people in the area, and it's spread out from the original port, which was established by the British, named after the Cape Colony Governor Durban, who was of Huguenot French heritage. But this became the string of ports that the British wanted to control the Cape, and back before the Suez Canal, that was a very important strategic move, so that the control of the coast would lead the way to India and Asia. So Durban spreads on this Natal Bay right there, and then inland to many communities. It's now a modern highway, auto-maniac traffic jam in a lot of parts of it. So like we've seen in the other cities, South Africa has become a much more prosperous and developed over the years, particularly in the 30, 40 years since the regime of apartheid was ended and the reforms began. But we'll be down on docks right in here, and then there's what they call the Golden Mile of the bay, and beaches and hotels and such, and then cricket grounds and race courses and things. So it's a very comprehensive city, spread out so that, of course, there are conveyances there, but there's a hill, and that's Howard College University up on top of it. We'll be docking like this and fairly close to downtown, and I believe there'll be a shuttle bus into the central business district for shopping, in case you haven't had the chance. But this is the attraction of Durban, because particularly when it was a smaller city, it had this beautiful bay and beaches. So it has to this day been a resort area for, particularly if you're in northern South Africa, Johannesburg, and other drier, dustier places. People come here to vacation. And so, like some other cities that are lucky enough to be on a nice beach, this is one of them. If you come out of the dock area, which is, of course, some security, then you get along the end of the great causeway, parkway, and this is a bit of a Victorian confection of a pavilion right off the former shore near the Maritime Museum. And so I had to peek in and say, well, who is this dedicated to? Queen somebody? Well, it turned out to be, it's a monument to Samson. And here he is, of course, wondering why he knocked down the temple and where did Delilah go. But this is a park, and I took this picture because here is Zulu, all the prohibitions in the park as a equal language to English. And of course, notice it'll be enforced sleeping. Well, that guy's testing the rules, I'd say. And then you walk right across the highway or the Cause Boulevard, and then you're in the central business district, which is, again, in the last decades, it's boomed up with office buildings and malls and a lot of new development. But that surrounds the core of the historic city. The municipal hall, city hall, post office are all in grand Victorian style and well preserved, though right around the corner there's another glass box. So the city is sort of spread out, so most people live in the outer area, and the center is left to the official and business end, of course, overseen by Queen Victoria. So there's a strong English heritage with new and modern buildings and also traditional houses. Again, this is Howard College. Here's a monument to a gentleman, Dick King, who saved the colony from invasion by the Zulus. Now, this was a century of warfare that's been described by others, Dean and Rob, who've gotten off the ship, and Zelda. Zelda will be here to talk after my talk about more issues that we can ask her about these sort of the tragedy of the wars that developed South Africa. And he rode to get on his horseback for 10 days and 600 miles to warn the British that the Zulus were going to overwhelm and massacre all the British in Durban. So he was successful, and they held out, and finally they made peace. Actually, one Englishman from Durban had medical skills, and he cured Shaka Zulu, the great king, from a wound, and then that was returned by a grant by King Shaka to the British settlers originally in the 1830s to have 30 miles and by 100 miles of this coast as their settlement, as long as they would stay there and would not move into the other valleys. So war has been a constant problem here, including those who went off to the Great World Wars from South Africa. And so let's say the British Lion is still remembered here, even though the empire is now a commonwealth. And as another example of that era, there were many Indians and other peoples, what they would call coloreds, come into South Africa for business and working in the land and other things. The most famous son of Durban is Mahatma Gandhi. And there are today large communities of Indians, including Muslims and Hindus, and so I believe there's a tour of the Indian culture in Durban, which is proud and prosperous. But you can see particularly mosques all over the city. Here's one near a main market. And so you have an energetic, mixed, diverse population, a lot of young people, a lot of commercial activity and tourists in town from around the world. And so the town has prospered as a shopping center. They just put up this great sort of Victorian glass house. This is a new mall outside of town. So this, again, is the modern South Africa, which is ever developing, and this sort of community gets together and has things to share like rugby and football and all the other sports that make a happy town, along with the beaches. But still, there's a lot of unemployment, particularly outside of the central district. There are areas of the former homelands where the local people were restricted. They couldn't go anywhere without a passbook, actually. But now everybody is free to associate and to travel and to follow their own personal path. And so you can see this kind of interesting mix of different cultures that all share the city. And I walking around the central business district is sort of a way to taste the variety of Durban and the energy of the town. And I was walking over a pass, and I saw this is an impromptu bus stop. When you see there's a band and they're playing music. So while the bus is waiting, you get entertained in this town. And I was playing a little bit of African music for your taste as you come in, but the revival of, let's say, shared experiences led to a cultural renaissance and a lot of popular music and shows and things like this that Durban is one of the leading cultural centers in all of South Africa. And on the street, you see vendors from the countryside. This is an agriculturally lush area with a lot of fruits and food and what I like, the Royal Hungry Lion. And if you want to go shopping, I do recommend the True Worths with OK Furniture. You need that at home. And then how about a little wishy-washy laundromat? I hear they have that even on this ship here. And then if you need a soul salon, sort of like the spa upstairs, you can get Dark and Love, Sunsilk, Restore. You can even get human hair here. So, I mean, this is the pleasure of human curiosity. And then my favorites are the Waza Mega Store. Well, anyway. And then you go out of the district, and there are all these highways and railroads and industrial thing. But the curious part of near the center city is under the underpasses, there is a informal market of traditional healers and herbal medicine where people come in from the countryside with whatever they have to sell. And then they have their own root vegetables and medicinals, including traditional doctor with his preserved and somewhat indelicate tinctures and medicines. If you need any of that, you really should ask them what it's all about. But this is the province behind Durban. So you go up into the mountains above, and so within 100 kilometers of the shoreline, there are very steep cliffs and an extensive inland. And there's a tour to the Thousand Hills, which is a beautiful area of rolling countryside, sort of like we saw in the East Cape, but even more high, and then eventually high mountains up into the plateaus of Lesotho, the independent kingdom, which has only this road coming from a town called Ladysmith, as in Ladysmith Black Mambo, the musical group. And then you come up into sort of a alpine forest, and then from these peaks you can actually see the ocean. So it's a pretty dramatic piece of land. And again, this was inhabited by people for thousands of years, going back 100,000 years. They found evidence of settlements in this area. And this Lesotho is a kingdom to itself and a people that never were conquered by the British, and they are independent of South Africa, except they're surrounded by South Africa. And there are a couple of other, Swaziland and a couple of small bits like this, that maintain their independence to this day. And up in these mountains, they reside in these kind of, some of them in these, under these ledges, which reminds me of my home state of New Mexico, where there are also settlements in the mountainsides and built same adobe style. But this land is most famous for its most famous son, King Shaka Zulu, who came from a smaller tribe. He was mythological birth, but he was a giant of a warrior, some 6'6" or 8", depending on who's exaggerating. And so he became the iconic leader of the Zulu nation, brutal to his enemies, especially those he joined in to a larger army, and then trained in tactics as warriors. He developed a short spear that was very effective in hand-to-hand combat, sort of like the Roman short sword. And so he led his armies with their skin shield and their steel or iron swords, and conquered all this whole area of KwaZulu land. To this day it's called that, which means the heaven and homeland of the Zulu people. So everywhere you go, you'll see images of him and his heroic deeds. There's his welcome knife. And so this whole area was in warfare for over 100 years, if you count not just the Afrikaner and the British who were fighting the Zulus, but this was, most famously a number of different battles, particularly this one at Rwanda in 1879, where the entire British regiment was put to death. And then nonetheless, the wars finally ended, and the Zulus were forced into acceptance of the larger rule of South Africa, particularly the Cape Colony. But the traditions go on. That kind of warrior spirit is very much instilled into the people, even as the people were put to work in agriculture. And the place became a less wild as time went on. But there are still leaders here that have that lineage from the era of Shaka Zulu. Here's King Goodwill, Zwelithini, who was the king in Lesotho. And then the women of the proper class will wear this very beautiful sort of sunshade bonnet that are beautifully woven. And that's a sign of being one of the matriarchs of the nation. So the conical beehive thatched houses are still made, and though they are naturally air conditioned, they don't need electricity and the kind of equipment you get in a concrete block. I mean, this is typical all over the tropics. The indigenous housing is much more suitable to the climate. And people still have their traditional house, and they have their electric vehicle to go to their office, downtown maybe, but they still keep this energy of the warrior tradition, if it's only mostly ceremonial. And so this is one of the shows that's put on all through this part of the country. But the people also have their own shamanistic religious life, which is sometimes mixed with Christianity or other forms of religion. The old saying was, when the missionaries came, we showed them the land, they showed us the Bible, and then when we converted, we had the Bible, but they had the land. And so that's, religion is a kind of a malleable effort of humans to get along. But the Zulu and the various other peoples have rituals, initiations, secret ceremonies, shamans, and above all, puberty initiation rites. And for the Zulu, the young boys will be covered with this kind of clay. They'll go through a circumcision, they'll go through fasting, and then they'll come out and become a man dressed up for the party like this. This is the men getting finished with their initiation rites and having a ceremony, which in some areas includes, let's say, wrestling a bull. Now, if I was a young teenager, I'd love to do that just to show that I could, and then, of course, let the bull go. But there are a number of variety of people. This is another group called the Mbele, who live up in the northern part of KwaZulu. But they have the characteristic lenzilla, the rings that are put around the neck as a sign of wealth and status, but I suppose it's good for your posture. But this is the iconography of their decorations, which have become a bit of an art form to themselves. You can buy many things with the Mbele designs, and then they will dress with that in their ceremonial robes, like this elders here. But even the regular people in their daily chores have the ornaments like that, which seem to be a little bit in the way of some work. But the people at peace now and some varying degrees of prosperity are very welcoming. Now, this is a very big change from if we'd come here 30, 50 years ago, when travel itself was restricted with the Dompas in Afrikaans, the pass book, where you could not leave your homeland and go anywhere without being inspected and permitted. And this is the heritage of apartheid, that people were grouped and restricted to those areas. Often they were driven off the good land, which was given to the Afrikaner, the British or other settlers, and the indigenous people were stuck in often marginal land. And so this is the heritage which, again, Zelda grew up in, can talk about more eloquently. I'm just a visitor, but it's being an American, having lived in segregated society in the South myself, I know what it's like. And now this is all past history after the resistance and the massacres and the injustices. And so again, we come back to the recent pain of this nation and the efforts of Nelson Mandela to reform it and make it a cooperative and peaceful country, which has remarkably happened. And again, Zella Lagrange will tell you more, but I'll just show you outside of Durban, and there's an excursion there to the town of Howick, and where his capture site is now a museum. But this portrait of him I wanted to show you again, because it's, if you don't get there, you can see it here. It's made of these steel strips that are mounted up, and then as you walk around, they are almost a very abstract piece of sculpture. But then as you move around and see it, then the portrait comes out. And this is a remarkable piece of work, I'd say. But up in the hills, we visit different places, Zulu villages on the mountaintops, other game parks, and the things that are listed in the excursions. But this one I went to, and it was sort of a garden hill with a lot of birds. This is a mask weaver that were making their own little globular nests, sort of like a Baltimore Oriole will make a nest like this, but they cover a tree in it and make a lot of noise around there. And then nearby there's a little swimming pool where you're advised not to go in because it's a crocodile farm, and you know, they almost look cute if they have enough moss on them, but they're not really wild in this case. They've been taken out of the rivers and the bays of the marshes, and they're put in there, but you can go take a look and talk to them. So the real question is, why don't crocodiles like fast food? Because they can't catch it. And what's the difference between a dog and a crocodile? The croc's bite is worse than its bark. And what do you call a crocodile that's a lawyer, a litigator? And or what do you call a crocodile that becomes a farmer, an irrigator? Or here's the one, what do you call a crocodile who's in politics? A delegator. All right, well, I'll leave you alone from that point. But anyway, up in the hills, 1,000 hills, there are all these beautiful valleys and some lakes, reservoirs and such, but the houses, the beehive houses are quite fantastic. And again, you could disassemble it and move it if you want, but they're actually very sturdy. They get storms and weather here, but the conical and open form of them actually is very stable. And so a lot of them have been rebuilt with the traditional ways and are there for either ceremonies or for us to visit, see the lifestyle. So there is a village that in the 1,000 Hills, if you go to this one, there are actually many, as this has become popular to go visit up there, with musical performers. Here's a woman ready for the show, and the shaman, who's the director of the theater, and often will wear again the noble bonnet of the Zulu women, quite elaborate weaving. The men wear antelope or springbok headdresses, and with the view in the back, we'll dance around. Now, this is maybe the show you'll see. I show it to you if you're not going to actually go there. This is what it will look like. And of course, we've had shows on board, and we'll have more. But this is again very energetic warrior dance and other symbolic traditions. And if my clicker will work. Well, that's a dance to scare away the Scottish Highlanders, probably. But there are other villages. I've been to here a number of times, and every time I go out to a different one, and some are equipped as lodges and restaurants, and some are part of a wildlife preserve and all the things we've been saying. But this was one up out of Durban that I went to a number of years ago with quite fantastic sort of ceremonial hall. I don't know whether it was old or was rebuilt, but it was full of people, and then they put on a show with the traditional dances and some explanations. Of course, this culture is very deep. It's hard for them to just translate it and say, well, this is the latest of our works. But a king, true or not, and a dancer, again, And so this is a very vibrant and a proud culture. They feel they were never really conquered, and now they have a major seat in the governance of South Africa. And here's one of the dancers with the beadwork. And you can buy many examples of it. This one is, her name I think is Slenda, so that might fit some of you. And then there are meals with restaurants and all these different specialties, the pumpkins and the potatoes and the different food that they have here, and weavings. And so there's plenty of things to buy, and the tourism has boosted the traditional crafts like it has some other places. But most of the people, the Zulu in particular, live spread out in these countryside. They'll still have a conical house or a thatched roof maybe, but many of them come into the city to make a living. They also have the problem of many migrants coming from Botswana and Mozambique, and so there's the same kind of tensions in South Africa that there are in other countries where there are all of these illegal immigrants that are either working jobs that nobody will do, or they'll set up what business they can. And South Africa is very full of people from around Africa, much less the rest of the world. And so you go to the markets and see all kinds of things that, this is the num-num, which is kind of a plum that you can see in the market. But tourism has made a big difference because now people can get marginal work maybe, but there's plenty of visitors and there's always something going on, let's say. Again, some of the music is still vibrant, and you can, particularly at night, you hear music going out everywhere. So for these young South Africans, and particularly the women, this is a whole new era, and many are well-educated and ambitious and entrepreneurs and well-traveled now. So this is, again, a great change for South African society. So the women fought for the vote, now we must claim our rights. Well, this is an issue in many countries in many ways, but especially South Africa, they've had a very big impact of HIV and AIDS. They have, out of the population of some 62 million South Africans, over 8 million are infected with the virus. And so the programs to try to suppress it and to take care of people have been now decades long. Well, anyway, then we go up the coast to Richards Bay, which was on the marshy coast of going up to Mozambique. This town was established by a British naval officer named Samuel Richards, again as an outpost so to make sure the French wouldn't take it, because they were in Madagascar and other islands in the Indian Ocean. But this is a very, let's say, wet place because it has many rivers, bays, and then beaches and lowlands, but it's been also industrialized. So even in these shallow waters with lots of little pieces of land and shore, there's a lot of wildlife, and that's why we're going there, to the inner lagoons and to the lakes that have the wildlife. But as we dock, we'll be seeing something like this, with a big industrial port, because this is the major, once the world's largest coal exporting port. And so this is the other side of modern life, that this industry has come into these rather sensitive places with hydroelectric plants, and now these are all farmed trees. Vast areas on the mountainsides are these sort of pine grown for pulp. And so you can see how the city sort of fits in the docks, and then you have all of these nature preserves. So for almost 100 years they've made these preserves because these are very, let's say, extensive saltwater lagoons, which have a lot of bird life, a lot of animal life, and particularly the hippopotami. And so if you take that excursion to Lake St. Lucia and to the Hippo cruise, you go out to here and there's docks, you get on a boat and go through the reed lands. So this is quite different from the mountain game reserves we've seen. And I've been out there a couple times and seen this Goliath heron. It looks like it knows what it's doing. Fishing. And this is a giant kingfisher, also in the marshland. And then I spied a eagle, what they call a fish eagle, African fish eagle, sitting out there. But the rulers of this area are our friends, the hippopotami, and there's one of the excursion boats. So you can get up somewhat close to them. They are very territorial, and they have a, I don't know, a herd. What is the nominative for hippopotamus? A herd? I think it's a hyperbole of hippopotami. But anyway, you get up close, the bull and then the mares will defend their little hippets. Is that what you call a small hippo? I just don't know. I'm not the naturalist I should be, except that, they are very charming to look at in the water, but they're very big. And again, they're sort of one of the big five because they are the animal of the wildlife of Africa that actually takes the most toll of humans, because if a human goes swimming in there, the hippos will go after it. And even though they just graze like a big cow on the grass, they will kill anything that gets near them and chomp on them. So this is the pleasure of that trip. If you don't take it, I'll just show you that you shouldn't get too close because they're always listening to what you're saying about them. For instance, how do you get a hippo to obey? You have to use hypnotism. And then what is their favorite music? Well, hippo hoppo. And let me see one more. No, I'll spare you. But this is the tusk of one of the males that got broken off in fighting. And so that's their business end. But they also will come up and out to migrate seasonally, and so they will go on land. And they seem, let's say, buoyant in the water. In fact, what do you call a hippo who's in the water? Bob. Oh, I'm sorry. But they do come out on land, and they're quite dangerous because they're determined, and they have, let's say, the inertia to keep going, and they can run pretty fast. And so they come into the villages around there, do a little late night shopping, or they come to taste if your pool is, clear enough, and they will run you down, but they'll run faster than a human. So one of our naturalist friends said, the one thing you should never do in Africa is run away if something's chasing you, unless it's, of course, the bus that you came on, and you really should get aboard. But again, this is the charm and the drama of South Africa, and I hope you will have a good experience in Durban and Richards Bay, and particularly up in the Thousand Hills. And I look forward to seeing you there and have a good voyage to these places. I'll next be speaking about the oceanography of the Southern Ocean in a few days, and then I'll give a talk on Cape Town as we approached our final great port there. But I wish you bon voyage and thank you.